I still remember that morning as clearly as if it happened an hour ago. The moment my quiet little office life took a turn I never saw coming. If someone had told me that a few months later, people would storm into my office like I was a criminal, I would have laughed and told them they had been watching too many movies. But sometimes the strangest stories do not happen in dark alleys or secret basements. They happen in the places we think are safest. And I stood right in the middle of one. My name is Emily Carter. I work at Sterling and Knox, a major financial firm in Minneapolis. I am 29, and I have spent almost a decade trying to find a workplace where I did not feel like an outsider. Before this, I survived a company that nearly drained me mentally, emotionally, and in every sense that mattered. It was the kind of place where the loudest voices got rewarded while the people doing the actual work faded into the wallpaper. I was the type who got everything done but never talked about it, so no one noticed. Once, after I spent an entire month analyzing data, my old boss praised the guy who presented the final slide in the meeting. That was the last straw. I walked out and promised myself I would work quietly from then on. No competing for the spotlight, no stepping into the mess of office politics again. Sterling and Knox felt different. Or at least, that is what I believed at first. This place revolved around numbers, risk reports, and meetings where one tiny mistake could cost the firm millions. And strangely, that structure fit me. I loved precision. I loved clear processes. I loved knowing people trusted me with major accounts. I was not the type to hold court at company parties or make bold speeches in front of executives. But I knew how to do the right work at the right moment, and that made me a solid part of the risk team. I never imagined that would be the very thing that triggered everything that came after. Madison Hale joined Sterling and Knox 6 months after I did. The moment I met her, I understood exactly who she was: perfect blonde hair, a voice that carried confidence without even trying, quick with conversation, the kind of person who could make friends in under 5 minutes. She shone in every space she walked into in a way I never could. People loved Madison instantly. She was lively, polished, sharp, and always seemed to know everything about everything. I did not have a problem with people like her as long as they left me alone. But with Madison, I learned quickly that my quiet existence was the very thing she could not stand. The first time I caught that strange look in her eyes was during our second weekly meeting together. I presented a risk assessment for a major client. My manager nodded, said I did well. Nothing dramatic, just the usual acknowledgement. I smiled, packed up my notes. But I could feel Madison staring, calculating, like she was trying to solve a puzzle, and I was the piece she did not like. Over the next weeks, the discomfort grew sharper. Not through confrontation. She was too smart for that, but through tiny things no outsider would notice. When I talked to my manager, she drifted nearby, pretending to look for a file while listening. When I sent an email, she would ask if I thought I should have phrased it more concisely. One morning at the coffee counter, she gave me a bright smile and said I seemed like the kind of person who likes doing everything alone. I smiled back, but a cold line slid down my spine. That was not a compliment. The only thing keeping me grounded during that time was the little notebook I kept in my drawer. I had started it a year earlier, after leaving the old company. A podcast suggested writing down a few good things each day, tiny things that made the world feel less heavy. I did it because I needed something that was not toxic. I wrote about simple moments: someone holding a door for me, a coworker bringing pastries, a warm conversation in an elevator. I never wrote about the bad things, never tracked resentment. That notebook was my quiet corner of peace in a place built on competition. And without realizing it, the days were inching closer to something I could not have predicted. Madison watched me more and more openly, though she hid whatever was driving her. I did not know it then, but everything so far was just the opening act. Because not long after, Madison would try to convince everyone in the company that I was the biggest threat Sterling and Knox had. Before I tell you what really happened next, if you are listening to this story from anywhere in the world, let me know where you are. Sometimes knowing where my words travel makes me feel a little less alone in all of this. And if you enjoy corporate stories filled with tension but wrapped in small, quiet lessons, do not forget to follow me. I have so much more to share, and what comes next will change the way you look at how people treat each other inside an office that seems perfectly calm on the outside. After that morning, I started paying more attention to the way Madison appeared in the small corners of my everyday life at Sterling and Knox. Not because I thought I was important enough for someone to focus on me, but because the tiny things she kept doing over and over began forming a low but constant noise in the back of my mind. A sound I could not quite name, just enough to unsettle me, not enough to confront. It all started quietly. Madison showed up in places where she had no real reason to be. If I went to the print room, she walked in right after. If I were talking to a coworker about a number in a report, she would stand nearby, silent, close enough to hear everything. If I sent an email, she would ask a little later if I wanted her to review the tone, even though no one had asked her to do that. Some people have a habit of wanting things to be perfect, but Madison was not trying to perfect emails. She was trying to perfect me. Slowly, her watching stopped feeling accidental. One afternoon, I walked into a conference room to prepare for an important risk review presentation. As I opened my laptop to connect to the big screen, I noticed Madison sitting in the corner. I had no idea when she arrived. She pretended to scroll through her calendar, but her eyes kept flicking toward me. When more people walked in, she gave a small teasing smile and asked if I was sure I had double-checked every detail in my report, her tone playful, but her meaning sharp. I stayed calm, thanked her, and focused on my work. But when the meeting ended and my manager praised how smoothly everything had gone, I caught Madison's expression shift for a single second, just long enough for me to understand she wanted me to doubt myself. I tried not to believe she was targeting me, but it was getting harder to ignore. In the days that followed, she inserted herself into my work even more. Once, while I was finalizing an internal report, she stood behind me and quietly suggested moving one sentence up and another one down. I told her I would review it. She did not leave. She stayed there, watching, as if waiting to make sure I followed her instructions. I felt the pressure, the strange control, but I could not explain why she cared so much. I am not someone who panics easily, but even I started asking myself questions. Had I done something to upset her? Had I accidentally bruised her ego? Or was I simply standing in her way? I did not have answers. All I knew was that her behavior was beginning to affect the people around me. Lauren, a young teammate who used to be cheerful and open with me, started keeping her distance. When I asked her about a number in a report, she answered quickly, then rushed off like she wanted to escape the conversation. I later realized Madison often had lunch with her. One day I overheard them talking in a hallway. Madison was speaking about me in a calm, analytical tone, as if she were offering objective observations. She said she was worried I might jeopardize client files because I was not transparent, I was too quiet, and I was probably hiding something. Lauren did not argue, she just listened. But her eyes, when she looked at me afterward, were not the same. That was when I realized Madison was not just watching me, she was building a narrative about me. And in a high-pressure workplace like Sterling and Knox, the wrong narrative could spread dangerously fast. I kept wondering if I was imagining things, but every time I tried to dismiss it, something else happened to pull me back to reality. Another afternoon, I walked past Madison's desk and glanced at her laptop. A folder was open. Its name was E.Carter-Documentation. Even in that brief second, I saw printed copies of my emails and notes filed by date. I froze. Some people keep references for their workload, but the way she grouped everything under my name told me she was preparing for something much bigger. I went home that evening and opened my little notebook of kindness. I reread the pages I had written about small acts of goodwill at work, doors held open, pastries shared, small moments that had kept me afloat. But the more I flipped, the more I realized there was not a single page with Madison's name. Not because I meant to exclude her, but because in all the time we had worked together, she had never given me a moment worth writing down. I did not know that in just a few more weeks, this harmless notebook would become the center of everything. But in that moment, I felt only one thing. Something was forming around me. Something profoundly wrong, and the storm I had been trying to ignore was already gathering its winds. I thought I was prepared for whatever Madison planned next, but I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go. Only 2 weeks after I accidentally saw the folder with my name on her laptop, she shifted from vague gestures to calculated moves. Sharper, more deliberate. and far more frightening. On a Monday morning, just as I set my bag down and turned on my computer, Lauren walked up to me looking uneasy. She said Madison had asked her to help with an internal communication review and that she had been assigned to check a few of my emails to optimize our team workflow. She said it softly, as if she knew something was off, but also knew she could not refuse Madison's request. After she left, I opened my inbox and found an email from Madison sent close to midnight. It listed areas where I supposedly needed improvement, from how I titled my emails to how I wrote conditional phrases, even the number of times I used the word thanks. The tone was polite enough, but every line implied I was damaging the team's image. She had copied my manager on the email. When I finished reading, my throat felt dry. Not because of the content, but because of the cold persistence behind it. Madison was not rushing. She was not lashing out. She was building a narrative brick by brick, like someone following a blueprint only she could see. From that day, I watched her more closely and quickly realized she was not simply collecting my mistakes. She was creating them. One time, I sent an updated report to an internal client. All the numbers were correct, but when I opened the folder the next day, the file had been replaced with an older draft. I knew I had saved the final version, but Madison told me I must have confused the files. What chilled me was not the act itself, but the way she said it with a face so innocent it was almost convincing. Another incident happened that weekend. Madison offered to help me review a complex report. I declined, yet somehow the next day someone approached me about a small calculation error I knew I had not made. It was too minor to cause damage, but it was perfect for someone trying to build a case that I was careless. I started writing in my notebook more often, not the negative moments, but the small bright ones to keep myself from drowning in pressure. A coworker brought homemade pastries. Rebecca from Human Resources smiled at me in the elevator. One afternoon, Lauren left a box of tea on my desk with a note wishing me a calm day, as if she felt guilty about being pulled into Madison's orbit. Those things helped keep a sliver of gentleness alive in me, while everything else was twisting out of shape. But I still did not understand why Madison was so fixated on me. Not until a midweek afternoon when I overheard something that finally revealed the edge of her story. I was walking down the hallway near the pantry when I heard her voice. She was talking to someone, quiet but unable to hide the bitterness underneath. She said that at her previous company, she had been labeled as someone who talked well but did not deliver. A coworker, someone she had once considered a friend, had outperformed her on a major project. After that, she had been demoted and eventually forced out. Madison said she would never let something like that happen again. I froze behind the wall. The words were not angry. They were spoken by someone hurt so deeply that the wound had hardened into a weapon. I walked away eventually, but the line kept echoing in my head. Never again. It was a vow and a warning. That was when I realized everything she did was not simple envy. It was fear. Fear of being surpassed. Fear of losing the recognition she chased at any cost. And in her eyes, I was the threat that awakened that fear. Not because I had done anything wrong, just because I existed. Over the next days, the truth about the E.D. Carter documentation folder became undeniable. Madison printed every email I sent, marked what she called errors with a red pen, and recorded the time I entered and left the office. Everything was placed neatly inside a black file folder she kept in her drawer. She thought I had no idea. But sometimes I caught her watching me, and her gaze no longer felt analytical. It felt like the stare of someone holding evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I did not know what she had gathered. I did not know that the folder would become the spark for an investigation that the entire office would remember. All I knew was this: Madison was ready, and she believed that this time she would win. I left the park in the early afternoon with a strange tightness in my chest. Lauren's message was still on my phone, only 3 words, but enough to make me walk faster than usual. When I stepped into the 6th-floor hallway, I realized almost instantly what was happening. The air inside the office felt wrong, as if someone had switched off every sound. No whispering, no keyboard clicks, only a thick, unnatural silence. Then I saw them. 2 people in navy suits stood beside my desk. The woman was small but sharp, hair pulled into a high knot, her badge reading Rebecca Knox. The man was taller, steady, with a calm presence. Leroy Dalton. Everyone in this office knew they were senior internal investigators, and their arrival never meant anything pleasant. They were going through the papers on my desk as if they were searching for evidence. My computer had been unlocked before I arrived, probably with access granted by IT. I stopped a few steps away and tried to keep my voice steady. What is happening? Rebecca did not look at me for more than a second. She said they were conducting a review based on an internal complaint and would provide details once it was complete. Her tone was neutral, offering nothing. I stood there while they worked. Leroy checked every folder, every file. Rebecca opened each email and scanned every conversation I had ever written. I studied their faces, searching for a warning sign, but saw nothing except the focused expressions of people doing the job they were assigned to do. Still, the sensation of being examined in front of the entire office chilled me to the bone. Coworkers nearby pretended to be busy, yet every pair of eyes found its way back to me whenever I was not looking. Madison stood farther away, holding a cup of coffee, watching every movement the investigators made. She did not look surprised. In fact, she appeared so calm, it felt like she knew exactly what was unfolding. Rebecca continued reviewing each drawer. I knew what was inside the second one the moment her hand touched it, and as expected, she pulled out the small brown leather notebook. The notebook I never imagined would become potential evidence in an investigation. She opened it. The air around us felt stretched. Leroy moved closer, standing beside her to read along. They said nothing, but I saw a subtle shift in their eyes the moment they read the first page. It was the page about Rebecca. On my first day at the job, she helped me fix my faulty badge and wished me luck. I had written that her kindness made me feel welcomed in a new environment. Rebecca stared at that entry longer than the others. They turned the page. Then another. Leroy's name appeared. I had written about him during last year's audit, when I had been overwhelmed with numbers, and he helped me trace the missing file. Leroy blinked slowly, as if remembering that moment. A small gasp sounded from the left side of the room. Lauren was standing there, cheeks flushed bright red. I knew she had just seen the page I wrote about the night she cried in the restroom because she could not finish a data set on time. I helped her, step by step, and I had written that she was far more capable than she believed. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. Rebecca flipped through more pages. Names appeared one after another: coworkers, technicians, security staff, the cleaning woman who worked nights. My handwriting is small but clear. I had written down every act of kindness I had received because sometimes those were the only things that helped me survive the longest days. Then Rebecca stopped. I looked at her, then in the notebook, and I knew the reason. For nearly 2 years, dozens of names filled those pages. Some appeared 10 times, some once, but there was one name missing, completely. Not a page, not a line, not a single kind note about Madison. The room sank into an even deeper silence. Rebecca did not turn another page. She closed the notebook, but kept it in her hands, as if it had just revealed something more important than any accusation in an email. Leroy looked at me. His expression was not one of blame, but of thoughtfulness. "Ms. Carter, we need to speak with you in the conference room." I nodded. My heart pounded, but my steps stayed steady, carried by a calm I did not know I possessed. As I turned, my eyes met Madison's. The triumph was gone, the calculation gone. Something else had taken its place: a quiet panic. She knew the notebook did not contain anything incriminating about me, but it had exposed something she did not want anyone to see. In an office where every interaction mattered, where even the smallest gesture carried weight, Madison had never created anything worth being grateful for. She spent months collecting my mistakes, undermining me, and crafting a narrative meant to destroy me. But the truth came from what she could not fabricate, the things she had never done. I followed Rebecca and Leroy into the conference room. The door behind us closed with a soft thud, and it felt like it was sealing off more than just a space. It was closing a chapter Madison believed she had already won. She had built an entire case to break me. But the thing that unraveled her plan was a notebook filled with kindness, where her name was nowhere to be found. And as I sat down, my palms cold against the table, I realized this was only the beginning. When the conference room door closed, the air inside seemed to thicken. Rebecca sat across from me, and Leroy sat slightly to the left. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner cutting through the heavy silence. They looked at me without hostility, but without ease either. Just the steady gaze of two people who had handled countless internal investigations. Rebecca began in an even tone, explaining that the complaint file against me was unusually long. It included documents, screenshots of emails, and notes about my arrival and departure times, all written with language suggesting I was a potential risk to the company. I did not react. There was no reason to. I knew exactly who had built that file. Leroy said parts of the file showed obvious bias. Minor mistakes exaggerated, non mistakes framed as violations, some statements taken out of context. I nodded slightly but stayed quiet. Rebecca said the person who compiled the file would be asked to join the meeting. I knew what that meant. The door opened. Madison walked in. She moved straight to the seat across from me, her face arranged perfectly for a moment like this. Professional, calm, certain. But I had worked with her long enough to see the cracks. Her movements were too sharp, too precise, like someone using perfection to hide something shaking underneath. Rebecca asked Madison to confirm she had submitted the complaint. Madison nodded, her voice smooth, saying she acted for the good of the company, that she wanted to ensure the team's quality would not be affected by what she called my instability. She said it all with the confidence of someone fully convinced she was right. Rebecca opened the file and pointed to several highlighted sections. She asked Madison why she labeled a minor internal email issue as serious, and why she described me as frequently disorganized without evidence. Madison kept her polite smile. I only documented what I observed. Leroy asked why so many of her observations focused solely on me when the department had more than 10 people. Madison said I managed major accounts, so she paid special attention. A neat answer. Practiced. Rebecca said nothing. Instead, she placed my brown leather notebook on the table. Madison's expression shifted for a fraction of a second when she saw it. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Rebecca explained that they had reviewed the notebook and found only notes expressing gratitude toward coworkers. Nothing negative, nothing harmful. Madison let out a soft laugh. I think writing about people without their consent is unhealthy. It makes them feel watched, and it could make others suspect Emily is ranking who she favors and who she does not. The words cut clean and sharp. Leroy responded that the notebook contained only positive moments and no critical observations. Madison tilted her head, feigning surprise. But what if Emily writes her personal feelings, especially about male colleagues? What if there is favoritism or something more? That could harm the work environment. A cold line slid down my spine. Madison was shifting strategy. With the complaint file crumbling, she pivoted to emotional insinuation, a vague but dangerous angle in a corporate setting. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. You are implying that a notebook full of kind moments suggests improper intent, even when it contains no such entries. Madison answered instantly, too quickly. I only want the company to be safe. Sometimes harmless things lead to major problems. I saw impatience flicker across Leroy's face. He flipped through random pages and read a few lines out loud. All of them are simple thank you notes for help on projects. Then he looked at Madison. I see nothing inappropriate here, but I do see a great deal of biased observation in the file you submitted. Madison's hands tightened in her lap. She was losing her composure. She said I was secretive, difficult to work with, that I isolated myself, that she was protecting the team from an unclear presence. But the more she talked, the more her voice shook. Rebecca set her pen down and looked directly at her. Ms. Hale, I have one question. Madison swallowed and gave a tiny nod. If you believe Ms. Carter created an unhealthy environment by recording acts of kindness, then why does your name never appear in nearly 2 years of her notes? Madison froze completely. Rebecca continued, her voice soft but sharper than anything before. This notebook reflects how people treat Ms. Carter. Dozens of names appear, but not yours. Not because she excluded you, but because you never offered her anything positive to write down. Madison's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face shifted from confidence to confusion, then to something closer to defeat. I saw it clearly. Madison was not just failing to undermine me. She was terrified of being seen again, as someone who created division. Terrified, her past was repeating itself. Terrified her real nature had slipped into view. Rebecca stood, calm but firm. "We need you to step out while we continue speaking with Ms. Carter." Madison rose, her chair scraping lightly against the floor. She did not look at me, but as she walked past, I saw her hand shaking uncontrollably. The door closed behind her, and in that moment, I understood our conflict was far from over. It had simply entered a new stage, a stage where Madison would no longer pretend to be composed, and I was no longer the one running from confrontation. When Madison left the room, the door closing behind her made a sound heavier than it should have. I sat still, staring at the table for a few seconds, as if my mind were still trapped inside the storm of the confrontation we had just gone through. Rebecca and Leroy took their time organizing the documents in front of them, not rushing, not tense. It felt like they, too, needed a moment to gather themselves after witnessing Madison's unraveling. Rebecca told me the next step was to review feedback from coworkers, to determine whether the environment around me was truly unstable, the way Madison's file described. She asked me to be honest if there was anything that concerned me. I simply said I worked in a way that allowed me to focus and avoid unnecessary noise, and that I had never intentionally made things difficult for anyone. Leroy nodded slowly, as he had known that all along. About 10 minutes later, the session ended. Rebecca told me to return to my desk, continue my work as usual, and wait for the official outcome. I stood and stepped out of the conference room, walking into the hallway with the hollow feeling of someone waking from a bad dream, light on my feet, but with a heartbeat stumbling out of rhythm. As I entered the open workspace, dozens of eyes turned toward me at once, as if the entire office had been holding its breath for this moment. But the atmosphere had shifted since the investigators first arrived. It was no longer cold curiosity. There was something else in it now, something closer to understanding. Lauren was the first to approach. She walked slowly, her expression a mix of confusion and guilt. She said quietly that she was sorry for doubting me, that Madison had made her believe the wrong things. I smiled and told her I did not blame her. She looked at me for a long second, as if she wanted to say more, but then she returned to her desk, her shoulders lighter. Another coworker, Jake from the finance group, paused by my desk. He said he had seen his name in the notebook once and had not realized that the small moment he had helped me mattered enough for me to remember. His voice was low and sincere. When he walked away, I could feel a subtle but important shift in the air around me. Not every look was like that. Some people still appeared unsure, uncertain what to believe, but at least the fear Madison had been feeding for months was losing its grip. I glanced around the office and saw clusters of people whispering to each other. Several glanced toward the conference room where Madison had been questioned. I could not hear their words, but I knew the topic was the investigation. Madison returned about half an hour later. When she stepped out of another meeting room, her expression was entirely different. No sharp confidence, no flawless composure, only a deep exhaustion, as if every layer she had relied on had cracked and she no longer knew how to hide the fractures. She passed a few coworkers and tried to smile, but it was too strained, too fragile. Some returned the gesture out of courtesy. Many did not. They simply looked at her and then looked away. There was no hostility, but the easy willingness to follow her lead was gone. The air around her felt like an empty circle no one wanted to step into. I said nothing. I did not stare. But I saw Madison glance toward me. In her eyes, emotions tumbled over one another. Anger, hurt, but most of all, fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of having her story exposed. Fear of being seen clearly at last. The afternoon unfolded in a quiet tension. People worked, but no one was truly focused. Lauren glanced my way a few times, then looked down again. Rebecca and Leroy moved around the office, speaking quietly with a few employees. The atmosphere held steady until late in the day when most people left earlier than usual. I stayed behind a little longer to finish the last part of a client report. As I gathered my things, I saw Madison standing alone in the coffee area. She was not making anything. She just stood there, staring into the distance, arms wrapped around herself like someone trying not to fall apart. She did not look at me, but I could tell she felt me there. For a brief moment, there was a silence between us that I still cannot name. No hostility, no victory, only the raw truth of two people trapped inside a conflict that neither one could control anymore. The day left a heavy aftershock across the office. A small truth in a notebook had shifted the way people saw one another. A weaponized complaint had forced everyone to question what they thought they knew, and a confrontation behind closed doors made it impossible to ignore that the things we do in secret can ignite a fire big enough to scorch an entire team if no one stops to see it. As I stepped outside, the afternoon wind felt stronger than usual. Even though the investigation was almost settled, I knew this was not the end. Madison was not someone who surrendered easily, especially when she felt her position slipping. But for the first time since all of this began, I did not feel alone. I did not need to argue or justify myself. The truth had started defending itself, and I could feel clearly that the storm Madison tried to summon was losing strength, not because I struck back, but because she had finally revealed what everyone had been too busy to notice. A simple truth. No one can hide the way they treat others forever. In the days after the confrontation, the office felt as if someone had opened a window and let in a different kind of air. No one mentioned the investigation or my notebook directly, but everyone acted like they had just woken from a long sleep and finally remembered that working together did not have to be heavy. And that shift became clearest during the first weekly meeting that followed. Mr. Walsh began by asking each of us to share one thing we were grateful for in the past week. He said it casually, without pointing to anyone, but the message was unmistakable. The old culture had reached its limit, and everyone was ready for something better. Lauren mentioned that Jake helped her organize an urgent set of documents. Jake smiled, then said that thanks to Lauren breaking down the numbers, he finished his report faster than expected. The gratitude sounded awkward at first, but then it began to feel real. 2 days later, Human Resources set up a large whiteboard near the pantry with a sheet of paper taped to the top reading Gratitude Wall. It came with no instructions, yet within one morning it was nearly full of colorful notes. One thanked the IT team for fixing the system. Another thanked the cleaning staff for making the conference table shine. Someone simply wrote that they appreciated the person who made their coffee. Small things, but they brought a lightness into the room, like the office had cracked open a window to let sunlight in. The wave of positivity did not end there. Gratitude appeared in emails. People checked in on each other more often. They shared work more naturally. The wary glances that used to hang over the department faded. I felt the shift every time I walked in. Brighter air, softer words, people caring in ways that were simple and genuine. In that change, Madison grew unmistakably out of place. She still arrived on time, still looked immaculate, but the confidence she used to wear like armor had thinned. She no longer moved around correcting people. She did not insert herself into conversations unless spoken to directly. She was so quiet at times that I would not have noticed her if I had not looked straight at her. But Madison tried. Maybe she realized silence would not restore what she had lost. One morning, she brought in 2 trays of coffee, handing a cup to each person. She said thank you, but her tone was identical every time and far too fast, as if she had practiced it dozens of times. People responded politely, but no one truly smiled. The gesture did not fit the Madison they knew. That afternoon, the team received a long email from her, a thank you message to everyone for the recent cooperation. As I read it, I noticed each paragraph had the same cadence, like she had copied the message and changed only the names. A few coworkers exchanged quiet laughs, not cruel ones, but because the effort felt painfully forced. Madison walked in just as they were whispering. She heard it, paused, and smiled in a way that told me she was trying not to break. The next day, during a short meeting, Madison raised her hand to thank Lauren for finishing a report quickly. Lauren looked startled, thanked her back, but everyone knew the two of them barely interacted. The room fell into a heavier silence after Madison spoke. She sat down still smiling, but her eyes shifted away as if she feared someone might see what was behind them. Meanwhile, the rest of the office adapted to the change with ease. No one tried to be special. They just worked with a lighter, more open rhythm. I realized I was changing too. I no longer rushed through the room trying not to be noticed. I stopped to talk with Lauren longer. I smiled when someone thanked me. I no longer avoided the simple interactions I once shrank away from. And without fear framing the way I looked at Madison, I saw something I had missed before. She was not cruel in the pure sense of the word. She simply did not know how to connect. She excelled at competition and debate, but she could not make people feel safe or respected. She did not know how to offer something positive, and because of that, she never learned how to receive it. One afternoon, I walked out of a meeting room and found her standing in front of the gratitude wall. She stared at the colorful notes for a long time, her expression neither jealous nor sad, but more like someone trying to solve a puzzle she did not understand. I slowed my steps, not wanting to startle her, but as I passed, she turned and looked at me. There was no confrontation in her eyes, only a quiet pause, as if she had finally realized that everyone else had found a rhythm she could not yet match. Positive culture does not create perfect people. It simply makes clear who knows how to join the group and who only knows how to search for a position outside it. Madison was not excluded. No one pushed her away. But the sincerity that filled the office made her forced attempts stand out even more. The harder she tried, the more her misalignment showed. And I understood something then. Sometimes a change in the environment does not need winners or losers. It simply helps people see where they truly stand. The weeks that followed passed in a steady calm that the office had not felt in a long time. The gratitude wall stayed colorful every day, the weekly meetings began with small acknowledgments, and the tension that once lingered between groups dissolved with each genuine interaction. But amid all that ease, everyone noticed a change taking shape, and it did not come from me or from those settling into the new culture. It came from Madison. She grew much quieter. Not the kind of quiet that comes from watching and calculating, but the quiet of someone left behind by a shift she did not know how to follow. In meetings, she rarely spoke. When the team discussed tasks, she took notes without arguing, a stark contrast to the Madison who once seized the lead in every discussion. Gone was the sharp, confident stride she used to carry through the office. Now she walked slower, more cautiously. I watched this for days and realized her shift had not come from punishment or discipline. It came from within. Maybe she was trying to find a new place to stand after the wall she had built for months collapsed without warning. Madison was no longer the one in control of the room, and when control slipped out of her hands, she seemed unanchored. One afternoon, Lauren brought a small envelope to my desk. She said Madison had left it for me and asked her to pass it along because it was not convenient to give it directly. I was surprised but opened it anyway. Inside was a plain card with only a few handwritten lines. Thank you for not turning this into a battle. I know I went too far. I will try to change, even if I am not sure I know how. I read the last line several times. The words were few, but there was a rare honesty in them. Not a full apology, not a full confession, but a quiet acceptance I never expected from her. I did not reply, not because I did not want to, but because it felt like the card was not meant to start a conversation. It was something Madison needed to say to herself. Meanwhile, the office continued moving forward with this new spirit. I saw it most clearly the week our team handled a major project. People coordinated more smoothly than ever before, dividing tasks, sharing information, and stepping in for one another without being asked. The pressures that once made tempers flare now encouraged collaboration. When I sent out the final documents late at night, I received at least 5 thank you messages. Nothing elaborate, but warm enough to matter. And then, a turning point came for me on a Monday morning when Mr. Walsh called me into his office. I was not nervous, but I had no idea why he wanted to talk. He invited me to sit and began with a sentence that made me pause. Emily, I want to discuss a new direction for your role. He said that during the investigation, not only the investigators, but the entire leadership team noticed that my working style brought stability and a positive influence to those around me. He said my notebook, whether intentional or not, showed that I observed the environment, understood the needs of my coworkers, and maintained professionalism, even under stress. He asked if I was interested in taking on additional responsibilities, supporting project coordination and mentoring newer employees. I sat there, unsure how to react. I had never sought a higher title. I never imagined myself in a role involving people, because I had always preferred to stay quiet and focus on my work. But as he spoke, I realized something. The qualities I once viewed as weaknesses, my silence, my attentiveness, and my caution, were the very things that made me fit for the new role. I said yes, Not because it was a career step, but because for the first time I felt I could contribute something beyond numbers and reports. As I stepped out of his office, I saw Madison in the hallway. She stopped for a brief moment and gave me a small nod. No words, no forced smile, just a quiet acknowledgement that we had moved past the confrontation, even if we would never be friends. A few days later, the news spread that Madison had requested a transfer to another department, a role with less group interaction and more data analysis, a place where she could excel without navigating the social connections that had always unsettled her. No one was surprised. No one whispered about it. No one celebrated. There was just a shared sense that things had found their natural conclusion. I watched her on her last day in our office. She still looked polished. She still walked tall, but something in her step had softened. I did not know whether she would truly change, but I hoped her new position would not force her to keep fighting the same shadows she had carried for so long. As for me, I placed the notebook back in my drawer, not to hide it, but to let it remain what it had always been, a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can steady you through the darkest stretches, and that sometimes the thing that saves you is not strength. It is simply the way you choose to see others. The first morning after Madison moved to another department unfolded with a calm that surprised me. There were no wary glances, no tense silences. People worked with a peace the office had not felt in a long time, and I realized I was breathing easier, not as someone escaping danger, but as someone finally settling into a rhythm that felt like home. I poured my coffee, sat at my desk, and looked out the window. Sunlight poured across the row of workstations, making the entire floor look like a new space. The gratitude notebook sat in my drawer. I did not open it, but its presence reminded me of everything that had happened. Something so small had managed to illuminate what everyone else had overlooked. During the morning meeting, Mr. Walsh congratulated the team for completing a major project. He looked at me with a steady confidence, and a light round of applause followed. I did not feel small anymore. I no longer flinched at attention. I had done my job well, and I deserved acknowledgement, even if it was only a nod. After the meeting, Lauren brought me a folder to review. She said the team wanted my help in building a clearer workflow because the materials I prepared during the project had been so easy to use. I smiled, surprised that something I had always treated as a personal habit could be so helpful. Lauren added that she was grateful the office had changed and that she once got swept up in the negativity Madison created. I told her I understood, because I had once been trapped in my own silence too. We shared a look, no more words needed, yet both sensing the quiet relief between us. That afternoon, Rebecca Knox returned to finalize the investigation documents. When she saw me, she shook my hand and said it was rare for an inquiry to bring something positive to an entire team. Sometimes they search for misconduct, she said, but instead they uncover something more important: how people treat each other and how truth knows how to defend itself. I only thanked her and watched her leave, feeling as if a final door had quietly closed. I walked back to the gratitude wall. It was covered with new notes, each one a small but genuine thank you. I was surprised to see my name a few times. Nothing dramatic, just simple acknowledgments. I helped review documents. I broke tasks into smaller steps. I explained part of a report patiently. I touched a blue note written by Lauren and smiled. Not because my name was there, but because I knew she was stepping out of her own fear. As I packed up for the weekend, I opened my drawer and took out the gratitude notebook. I reread old entries, lines I had written on days when I felt tired, confused, or alone. Each one reminded me that office life was not only pressure, but also the small acts of kindness that kept me from being swallowed whole. I reached the last page and paused. I had written about many people, but never about myself. This time I put the pen down and added a single line. Today, I am grateful that I did not let anyone else decide who I am. I placed the notebook in the top drawer, no longer hiding it. I wanted it close, a reminder that kindness is not something to display, but something that quietly shapes the way we exist. As I stepped out of the office in the glow of sunset, I thought of Madison. Not with anger, not with judgment. Just a calm thought that perhaps she would find a place where she fit better. She was not entirely wrong, not entirely bad. She was trapped in a way of living that forced her to fight to survive. I hoped that in her new position she would learn how to exist without pushing others down. On the way home, my heart felt unexpectedly light. I understood now that the conflict between Madison and me had never been a true battle. It had been a journey that forced me to choose who I would become. And I chose calm. I chose kindness. I chose steadiness. Not loudly, not vengefully, just by standing firmly in my own truth. In the end, what I learned was not how to fight back or how to win over someone. It was about how to stand with myself in a kind and honest way. Because truth, when not distorted by fear, always finds its way to the light. And sometimes a single notebook filled with small moments is enough to change an office, a team, and most of all, the person who wrote it.